You ready,
No,
Petra?
no, we're pretty well set.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to call to order our Planning Commission special call meeting for December 18th. And Ms. Reynolds, would you give the roll call, please?
Mr. Daddy,
I'm here.
Mr. Babinet,
Here.
Mr. Kelly, Mr. Conley,
Here?
Dr. Curran,
Here.
Ms. Hennessy,
Here.
Mr. Irwin.
Here. Thank you. First on our agenda is the public comments regarding our agenda of the day. Anyone like to make a comment? And if not, you'll have another chance at the very end. Okay? Thank you.
Wait,
Daddy,
Dr. H.
Okay, please, Michael.
Sorry, I thought that Lee would speak first. Michael Heidingsfelder, 2 Shell Creek Landing on Kiowa. Haven't really planned to be here so soon again. Thought that my second retirement would leave me out of these kind of things, but I think this topic is too important. When I served on the Planning Commission, I always looked at my role as serving the people, not trying to amend an ordinance to the liking or pressure from council members or several council members that had very strong opinions or intentions. The role that I always was trying to play was to look at what is the best solution for our island. Well, I think, Joanne, gentlemen, we all know that we are a barrier island. And honestly, when we came here the first time 25 years ago and then bought our first property 20 years ago, I always thought that the biggest threat that I have to be concerned about as a property owner is some kind of Yugo-like storm. And that was always my way of looking at this. I think latest since December 17th of last year, exactly a year and a day ago, I think we all still remember that a very strong rain event combined with high tide can also bring a multi-decade flooding incident to us. You might remember I'm not sure if it was the first time, it was certainly the first time in many, many years, Mingo Point Curve was closed. There were several stretches of Kiowa Island Parkway and Governor's Drive unpassable. I saw water running from the street over my driveway into the marsh. That was December 17th of 2023. I think as Lee will outline, yes, driveways are a small portion of our impervious surfaces on the island, but they are with 3.5 or 4% of the entire, buildable surface of the island. And I think we need to be concerned about to not reach the 20% coverage of our island, because then we get into a different stage of environmental impact, as scientific studies have shown. So when you look at these scientific studies, there are certainly different options that come to mind. We can stop building homes. One option, it's probably unlikely. We can go back to dirt roads. It's probably also not exactly what our citizens want. So the only chance we really have to work to create a better absorption of water, on our island is parking and driveways. And that's why I was indeed shocked to learn that council had sent back an ordinance which I looked at and felt was the right thing to do. Was very powerful, would be sending a very strong message to the community and beyond, and was equally disappointed that council rejected that. So I would hope that the Planning Commission continues their effort, or your effort, in making sure that we are finding the best solutions for this island and not the best compromise. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. John, would you take us into a new business, please?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I am just going to kick off and just give an update of where we are in this process, and then following that, I'm going to ask Lee Bundrake with the Kiowa Conservancy to come up and provide some additional context based on impervious, pervious coverage across the island. He's did some additional analysis since that September 30th stormwater management workshop, and that particular presentation, I think, will help add some additional context as you begin to evaluate the ordinance. So as it stands, just a reminder that this particular ordinance has received support from the Comprehensive Marsh Management Work Group, and that's made its way through a process ultimately back to Planning Commission, or up to Planning Commission, and back in July 3rd, Planning Commission did recommend approval and shared that with Town Council, where a public hearing was held with Town Council, first reading. That first reading was tabled, and that public hearing was tabled until that September 30th workshop as noted, and just last month, November, is when we had the public hearing and first reading for this particular ordinance. Just recently at our December meeting and anticipated second reading of that particular ordinance is how we found ourselves to where we are today. Town Council did review that ordinance, recommended some additional changes, and so per the advice of legal counsel, that was recommended that we share this back with the Planning Commission for review and recommendation. And so for today, your sort of task is to review that ordinance again, and I'll state that your recommendation could be the same, it could be modified. You can share, treat this essentially as a new recommendation on this particular ordinance. Any questions on the process of where we are, expectations? Okay, so I'll ask Lee.
Yep, one question, John.
Yeah.
So before today, we could accept town council, reject or modify town council? Could we also go back to drawing board on this?
So I don't want you to say reject town council. You're just focused on the actual ordinance itself. So you're looking at the actual language in draft form and saying, we recommend approval of this ordinance. You can recommend approval with changes to that particular ordinance, but council's decision to share this ordinance back or remand this ordinance back to the Planning Commission allows you to get fresh set of eyes on it and treating as if you're looking at it for the first time. Did I confuse you more?
A little bit, yeah. So I thought that we also had the option not to accept the changes requested by town council on this.
Correct. So you could provide
Okay.
any language that you think the ordinance should be in its form in its approvable state, and that will be shared with town council.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So if there are no other questions, I'll bring Lee up.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So, not part of the ordinance that we're focused on right now, but some of this ordinance now is somewhat outdated because we have landscaping requirements for parking areas, and I thought we moved that into the other ordinance.
So that ordinance hasn't been adopted yet
Okay.
by council, so that will have first reading in January. So there's technically no changes have been made to our current code, even though that recommendation from the Planning Commission has been made regarding that ordinance being modified, bringing in the landscape standards.
Well, would it be more efficient to take care of the ordinance in total instead of just focusing on sections at a time, since potentially in a month, this again is going to have to be revised again?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that cleanup can occur at this final second reading because this is tracking a little bit ahead of the landscape standards, and I don't want to make any changes to that until we get confirmation that, so if they were both in line, I think we could administratively make it a little easier. I think by the time we get to second reading, if that's feasible with council, we probably can make that ordinance look in its final stage of with those changes being made, recommended from the landscape component, yeah.
All right.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Lee Bundrick with the Kiowa Conservancy, their Senior Conservation Coordinator. So I was asked by the town to provide some additional context related to not only current conditions related to stormwater, but also look at potential future projections and with a focus on driveways. As just kind of refresher, what I did over this past summer was basically digitized all of the different types of impervious surface on Kiowa Island. That includes roads, parking, buildings, driveways, multi-use pathways, and other things. From this, we can create some land cover maps, and we were able to do some additional analyses. And what we came up with is sort of a kind of a summary of impervious surface cover on the island. So if you exclude all the lowlands and ponds, we have about 3,725 acres of uplands. And of those upland acres, we have about 669 that are completely covered by some type of impervious surface. And this is about 18% of the island. And for this specific discussion, I think it was kind of focused on residential properties. That's something we could accurately kind of look at because we can do this parcel by parcel. So for the question that was posed to me, which was, what is our current driveway coverage? What is our current building coverage on lots? And kind of look at the projections from there. Refresher, one of the things that I did focus on before was, based on impervious coverage, what is the potential environmental impacts? And there's a paper by, several papers by DNR and NOAA that discuss a 10 to 20% threshold where you start to see adverse impacts. But once you reach over that 20%, there's additional types of environmental impacts that could occur because of that increase in impervious coverage. So generally, those are the two kind of thresholds that scientists within the region kind of see as potentially something to focus on. So with that, I kind of looked at not only our existing coverage and analyzing that, but looking at the projections into the future. So what you see up on the screen is a map that shows the existing residential lots according from Charleston County under a residential lot class code. And then the developable vacant lots according to the Charleston County GIS, which is based on vacant residential lot. The one thing that I should mention is that the analysis that we did conduct did not consider commercial lots. And the developable vacant lots that are included in this analysis also could be buildings that could have been built on already. It's just they haven't received a different class code change from the county. So this is just based on the county GIS data as of December 13th, and that's where we kind of ran our analysis. But generally, we see about 1,957 existing residential lots that are above 8,000 square foot. And we have about 440 developable vacant residential lots on the island. With the existing residential lots, we ran an analysis based on the coverage that we did digitize, and we see that of those residential lots, about 25.8% are covered with some type of impervious surface. And this is about the median you would expect for any residential lot across the island. And the reason why we ran the median values for this is because we wanted to remove outliers and kind of give a more representation, a better representation of what you would see on a typical residential lot. But of that impervious coverage, you see about 68% of that being buildings and about 62% being driveways. So we used that in the analysis in order to kind of come up with a good understanding about what are the future projections for each of these coverage types. And then, we took this information about the existing lots and we had attached it to these vacant lots that are going to be developed or could be developed. And we looked at two scenarios. One was actually looking at what's in the current town code for residential one lots. So looking at the maximum lot coverage for those, so running lot sizes, looking at how much impervious cover you could put on a lot, and then running the analysis based on that. And then a second scenario looking at that 25.8% median coverage and running that across the island as well. And generally what we see, I included some numbers up at the top in the table, but I wanted to highlight the numbers in the boxes below. But if you have a maximum build out of these residential lots, you're looking at about 19.8% total coverage of the uplands on the island, which is a 1.8 increase in the total impervious cover. And if you isolate that and only look at driveways, driveways would cover about 3.6% of the island. If you look at the median lot coverage, you have about 16.3% that total impervious cover on the island, so an increase of 1.3. And of just looking at driveways, you have about 3.4% in driveway cover on the island. And this is sort of a breakdown of these numbers. So looking at 18% right now, 19.3% in a median typical developed build-out situation, and then you have 19.8 for maximum build-out without the allowable increases in lot size. And then you have the kind of the statistics for driveways on the other side. But generally, we're looking at between 19.3 and 19.8% impervious cover at residential build-out. So anywhere between that projected range is what you would expect. So about 19.5% is what we would see in a residential build-out scenario. And it just provides some kind of visualization of what that looks like. If you took all of the impervious coverage and you just lumped it all into one concrete pad, generally it would run all the way from the western portion side of the Keel River all the way past the wastewater treatment plant on the island. And that's represented by the green that you see up there. And then when you add in the median lot coverages that you would see in the residential lots, you reach the yellow point, and then at maximum lot capacity, you would have up to the orange. So that's just a representation about how much impervious cover it looks like when you kind of drive across the island. So in summary, right now we're at 18% impervious cover. In the next threshold that we would see, it's about 20%. And based on the existing lot coverage right now, existing impervious cover, we have about 70 acres of additional impervious cover till we reach that threshold. And what we see from this analysis is that an estimated about 19.5% impervious cover at residential build-out. This is a 1.5 increase from the existing impervious cover on the island. But this does not include any potential for future commercial development because we don't necessarily know what's going to go on specific commercial lots. But this kind of gives us a good understanding of potentially if we were to develop all of these lots that are remaining on the island, what would that look like and how much impervious cover are we looking at? And there's a lot of variables in here, but I'm really happy to kind of provide any additional information to kind of help decipher the information. So. Thanks.
Questions?
Yes, so the data doesn't include current commercial properties.
It does not.
And when you say commercial properties, does that also include golf courses, things like that?
That would be correct, yes.
So all that undeveloped golf course acreage would actually be lowering this 18% down.
I think for the future analysis, I included only residential lots, but the existing coverage is pretty much the whole island. So any impervious coverage on any type of property would include that. Just the future projections didn't include any commercial or industrial or anything like that.
So the 18% right now includes the island as it is?
Yes, sir.
So we're really looking, when I'm looking at these numbers, it looks like we're doing stuff at the margin. Can you tell us what you think the impact, if we were to go to pervious, given the numbers of that aren't that big, what's the impact?
Well, I think the biggest concern right now, we have water quality impairments within the Kiowa River and the Basin Center Creek. So they're currently shut down to fecal coliforms, and a lot of this is because of stormwater runoff and other things that are impacting water quality. You could potentially see this being impacted, either being more severe or more frequent following any type of rainwater events. So anything that collects on these surfaces is going to end up downstream if it's not remediated in the ponds. So likely we would see water quality impairments and even more volume of water going downstream. And this will lead to, like, one of the concerns right now is erosion along Marsh Creek banks. A lot of this is because of the increase in the volume of the water going downstream following a rainfall event. So as ponds release water during these low tide events, because of the gravitational pull going down, you'll actually see more water going out and potentially eroding properties and marsh edges a little bit faster.
Yes, question here. Go ahead.
Right. So I asked the town to provide me with some data points for the last 17 months. And we picked that, I picked that time frame mostly because I felt that's a time frame when the town, KICA, the Conservancy started to talk more about impervious versus pervious surfaces, so there was a little bit more knowledge in the community. So in that time frame of 17 months, the town has issued 46 permits for new constructions, 20 for additions, and 217 for renovations after the second gate. So I was not looking at the first gate because there are too many condos and too many, semi-commercial buildings, so I was really looking at the single-family homes. So I started now to actually drive along all of these roads. And I'm probably 15% through those numbers yet after the second gate. I found one driveway, a single driveway that was not remodeled into a concrete driveway. One out of, I don't know, maybe 50 I visited so far, just as a context.
No, that's a good comment. Appreciate a comment. Go ahead. Let's get these out of the way now.
Hi, my name is Greg Darris. I live at 100 Bellmead Hall. I got a couple of things. One, a question on the calculations. Mm-hmm. Do your calculations assume that the new buildings will not have impervious, or do they assume that they will also be pervious? Under the adjusted ordinance now, none of those driveways or parking areas would be impervious. They would be pervious. So does your calculation deal with that?
The calculations generally assume that every single one of the surfaces, driveways that would be put in, the natural, option would be to put in a impervious driveway. So that just assumes all driveways are impervious. Yeah.
So I think where I was going with is that slightly inflates then what your final numbers are in terms of what would be impervious. Because under the new ordinance, you wouldn't be able to put in an impervious driveway if you're building new on those 400 lots or on the new commercial or any of the others, correct?
Yes, and I think the purpose behind this is that if you were to not have the ordinance going, for instance, it would be 19.5%. If the ordinance, goes through, you would reduce it by a specific percentage because it would be required to put in, there's pervious driveways and this, that, and the other. But I think it's just to provide some context, like if we were going to go down the route we're going down now, status quo, we would look at 19.5% versus another scenario where, 50% of the driveways go in are, pervious, we would cut that down by percentage.
One more thing for context. I am getting ready to redo our driveway, and I will be doing it with pervious, or at least a significant portion of it. So I don't want people to get the impression that I'm looking at this from just that perspective. However, there is a 60% differential in cost between doing concrete, and that's not even the cheapest option because asphalt would be cheaper, between concrete and these and pervious installations. At 112 acres, that's an incremental charge to the community, the people that live on this island that you're mandating, of $58 million, today's dollars.
Greg, can I just
Go ahead.
dig down on this for a second?
Yeah.
Are you comparing concrete to pervious concrete or concrete to pavers?
To pavers,
Because if you go from anything to pavers, whether
Right.
it's pervious pavers or impervious, pavers are more expensive. So I think in apples to apples, what we need data on is if you're doing concrete to pervious concrete or asphalt to pervious asphalt, maybe Lee could talk to that a little, because
Yeah.
anything, pervious concrete to pavers is going to be a huge difference. Anything to pavers, because they're more expensive to install.
I hadn't gotten a bid for.
So I just want to be sure when we talk numbers, we're doing apples to
Right,
apples.
and there are only certain surfaces allowed in various regimes, so I think that kind of impacts it too. But, if the ability were there to go from a concrete to pervious concrete type surface, you're talking maybe a 15 or 20% increase in cost, not a doubling or tripling that would be associated with pavers. So it really depends on the material you're going to use as a pervious type material.
Yeah.
And
Go
also,
ahead.
we received a written comment that John distributed today from Shannon White, who addressed, used the Sandcastle parking lot as an example of a part pervious, part impervious. The fact that the Sandcastle is part pervious, does that allow it then to be viewed as a pervious? What's our definitions of pervious? Is the Sandcastle, I thought all along, was an example of what we wanted, but obviously it is a combination of pervious and impervious. So where are we gonna be satisfied? Again, is pervious asphalt or concrete, is that sufficient? Or do we need, do we have definitions of what we want as far as pervious surfaces?
A good question. Yeah. No, I think based on conversations I've had about this, because, in the Marsh Marital Work Group, we've talked about this pretty frequently. And one of the major concerns about, doing pervious surfaces on any surface that's used as kind of like a roadway or thoroughfare, is that you're going to have significant wear and tear. You're going to have larger trucks that are going to go past this, and that potentially would wear down some of these pervious surfaces over time. So having these kind of main channels where you're allowed to have sort of these impervious areas that are a little bit more, maybe durable is not the right way to put it, but they're a little bit more, they can bear more load over time. That's, okay. And when you have it in the parking spaces, which is what they have at the Sandcastle, you're reducing it by quite an amount. When I went to study the infiltration rates, it was about 138 inches per hour, which is very, very high. If you're reducing any amount of stormwater, that's great, because a lot of it will infiltrate in those areas and it won't run into the middle. So if you have 50% of that parking lot with impervious surfaces, then that's 50% of that stormwater not going downstream. So that's at least why I see it. So it just depends on,
And then,
site
sort of
conditions.
take that question to the
Yeah.
next level, how about the individual driveway then? How much of that needs to be pervious versus, and can these pervious surfaces handle the occasional trucks that do come and have to park in the driveways?
Yeah, and that's likely something an engineer could better answer, but I think it would just depend on the materials. If you're looking at pavers, concrete, or asphalt, it would just depend on how much load-bearing capacity they have. But if you have something like pea gravel, it's, low cost, any type of truck can drive over it, and it's just basically, gravel on top of sand. That's, it can bear any load and can be replaced pretty easily. But, yeah.
To go on then, do we need to answer these questions a little bit more for the ordinance before we think about moving forward? I think there's, as I said, Shannon White brought up a good topic, and I don't think, I think if we're gonna put an ordinance, it would be, and that we're gonna include driveways, then we better have these answers as far as costs and what's gonna be acceptable and how much has to be, pervious and how much can be pervious asphalt, and so I don't know. Like I said, it seems that there's still questions out there.
No, that's a good point. I don't think,
Yep.
I don't think we want to make a decision in this room that's going to put a burden on our residents. And if we don't know exactly that cost factor, it kind of puts us in a bad light, I think.
Yeah, as I said, I think it'd be nice that we can answer some of these questions.
Oh, absolutely.
And a question for Lee as well. Lee, if a driveway is both pervious and impervious, is there a way to offset the impact of the impervious surface through the use of drainage features or other things to help kind of get maximum management of stormwater?
Yes. So if you have a portion of the driveway that is impervious and it kind of washes downstream into an area, and you put something like a rain garden, which has soil that has been kind of tilled in that allows it to be more it infiltrates a little bit more, that would reduce the stormwater runoff. So I think it's about the right practice next to it. But typically, a lot of the experts and scientists related to this specific topic, they call them treatment trains. So you would have a treatment train that would go from, maybe you do a downspout disconnect, you would have it go onto a driveway and then into a rain garden. That way you're reducing as much as possible downstream. But there are alternative practices that could go in lieu of that if that's something that, if a specific lot you can do that on a specific lot. So.
Okay, and that would almost get back to the point where if a driveway were 100% pervious, you'd almost be able to offset to get back to that point to equal that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Lee, is it not also true that really any planting, if you direct water from an impervious surface to any plant area, that it would allow the water to infiltrate, as opposed to just having a pine straw bed or an area of sod where water runs off?
Yes. So, yeah.
Could somebody repeat that question?
Can't hear me.
Oh, yeah. So Jen Hayes brought up a good point that pretty much directing water away from anywhere that's like, you direct it towards a place with plants generally, it would kind of slow down that water and allow it to infiltrate, which yes, it does. And I think it depends on the type of plants. If you have herbaceous vegetation and grasses, something that has more fibrous roots and more vegetation instead of woody vegetation, it'll slow that water down and actually allow it to infiltrate over time. And those plants will actually absorb that water as well. So that's it. And I think it's just about, making sure you can slow down that water, allow it to filter, and your immediate what's going into the stormwater system, the actual gray infrastructure. So.
And I think one of our council members had a concern too, just with the general soil types that we have on Kiowa, that the water doesn't necessarily go down into the ground. It spreads horizontally rather than vertically. Is that an issue with the permeable type or pervious type application?
In some aspects, yes. So whenever you have a significant rainfall event, that first inch or so will saturate the top part of that soil. And what happens is we have AD soils on the island, so group AD, which means that in dry conditions, it'll infiltrate fairly well. But once it gets saturated, it turns into a D soil, which means it just runs off. There's more runoff and it just doesn't infiltrate. So depending on the situation, if you have too much rain, it'll actually flow off and produce runoff as well. And this was one of the reasons why in the joint meeting we had in September, I mentioned that, having a driveway, it's not necessarily just what's on the surface, it's actually what's underneath it. Because what you want to do is basically create a reservoir underneath that allows it to collect water so it can infiltrate over time, because the soils will infiltrate 0.5 inches per hour. So having that area where it settles in so it can infiltrate naturally over time sort of addresses that issue with the natural infiltration on top. But generally what we found is if you dig underneath the soil, like on the top 5 or 6 inches, you can actually allow it's a little bit more, the sand actually infiltrates better. Don't go everywhere and do that, but generally it's allowing that water to collect somewhere and infiltrate naturally over time. So Yeah,
Got it, thank you.
yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, go ahead. Please.
You want to come up here? Yeah, you want to come up here?
Great, thanks for all the information. It's been very interesting. And Jennifer Hayes, I got the 2 thumbs up. Jennifer Hayes, I'm a landscape board member with the Kiowa Island Architectural Review Board. And I am stepping into this ordinance discussion just kind of at the last minute and have been interested in what everyone's been talking about and come to date. And just as part of my understanding of that, have a few questions and comments and maybe things to consider as you work through your own thoughts. First, as it relates to Shannon White's comments from the Community Association, I would echo her question and request for consideration that areas that have to handle higher volume of traffic and load be considered to have impervious paving for them. If that is not something that you're open to considering, then my next question would be, to ask an engineer, whether or not pervious asphalt can handle the same load and have similar maintenance as regular asphalt. And it might be that it can, I don't know. They can increase the base of asphalt to allow for it to handle heavier loads, at least in a standard asphalt application. Is that also true for the pervious asphalt and allow for it to remain pervious? I'm not sure, but I think that kind of information would be helpful so that you know about the potential implications of the ordinance language that you're considering for either commercial properties or areas where there is a lot more traffic than a residential driveway. And then as we look at the information I think that John put together for today on number 3, it says that the Planning Commission is being asked to consider the threshold for replacement and whether it would be a 50% or not. And I was wondering if it would make sense for the ordinance to apply to just an entire driveway replacement when that is being done, so that there's not a patchwork. Normally if it's not an entire driveway replacement, what we at the ARB see is that people are coming in to replace pieces that have been damaged. And how do you do that in a way, if you have to use a different material, how do you do that in a way that looks intentional? Yes.
Just to clarify, I thought driveway replacements had been removed, and this 50% was referring to parking.
Okay.
I haven't
Yes.
gone through any of the discussions from council. I was going to wait until after to kind of get into the.
I'm just to clarify, is that correct?
This is regarding parking. I mean, driveway component was.
Right, so the 50% was for parking.
It was, okay, gotcha.
Either new parking
Okay.
or replacement parking.
Okay, thank you. And then, not to jump ahead, but please correct me if I'm wrong, John, but for number 4, where you have a staff recommendation that the effective date be 30 days, understanding what the concern is from the design team side, I'm not sure that that timeframe would really address their concern, because what I think they are thinking is that you come through the ARB process, with some expectation of a driveway, and you're getting that priced. And in most cases, going from impervious to pervious does double the cost. no matter the material. And so if you're in that pricing exercise and review process, you have an expectation of budget, and 30 days notice would not allow for homeowners and design teams who already have their budgets worked out to accommodate that increase. And so what I would propose for consideration is that an ARB review, for example, is valid for 6 months. So something more like the 6-month timeframe would allow for that concern to be addressed.
That's the last sentence in that paragraph is kind of headed towards where
I just wanted to lead you there. Great. Okay, we're on the same page then. Thank you very much. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Or you can.
We were just talking about the incentive allowable maximum lot coverage. What's the justification for that? If the goal is to decrease the amount of impermeable surface, why would we increase the lot coverage if someone's doing a permeable driveway?
You're referencing the,
Page 1 of 10,
okay.
section 12-63, the table in the middle.
Yeah, it's been reduced, but what's the logic behind
What's the
having it?
rationale for reducing it, or what's
The
the
rationale for having it at all?
That's been in our current code today. So this marries the ability for a property owner. Let me go back and I think let me go back a little bit further. Most of our single-family lot residential lots have 33% maximum lot coverage.
Right.
That 33% can be increased if there are certain metrics that have been met by the property owner based on design. So today, our code allows for that 33% to be increased by a percentage of 20%, and that's 20% of the lot coverage, not 20% of the in total size of the property. The benefit of that is to be able to encourage that you have the ability to gain coverage based on decisions made of reducing the amount of impervious. That is a built-in incentive that marries closely to what the allowable increase provides. So our ordinance technically does not reward a driveway for being pervious as it's written today. So even if the property owner decides to put in a pervious driveway, by definition in our code, that's still counting towards that 33%. It's not going towards the allowable increase. That allowable increase allows now for some of the unique type properties where you might have an additional parking area, you might have an additional turnaround, for those areas to become pervious and not necessarily impact that 33%. So it gives the property owner some incentive, and this was done, I think, way in 2005 or around that time, to allow the property owner some benefit. And this also includes like walkways and areas that are not your traditional building footprint, but there are contextual elements of the site plan that would allow to be pervious that doesn't penalize towards the coverage total. The question of why would this be allowed? I mean, I think it's where we are in the maturation stage of Kiowa. There are, I don't know the percentage of that, but majority of all homes probably have taken advantage of this allowable increase. So we would potentially, if this were to be removed, you would essentially now have majority of the houses be non-conforming when it comes to lot coverage, which there are a lot of them existing today. I don't know if that answers your question, but if you can share more of what you are kind of diving into. And this also aligns with what the standards are or guidelines are with the Kiowa Architecture Review Board. So your 33% goes to 36, what's the, 0.97. So that number, based on where there are restrictions based sometimes even on neighborhoods that don't marry with the zoning code, those are absent of our zoning code. I'm still confused on what your true question is, though.
Well, I think the question is why are we, if we're trying to limit pervious surfaces or impervious surfaces, why are we allowing for more lot? When a great percentage of the lot coverage is,
Then I would say then you would just go in and look at your 33% and if you're trying to truly reduce the total amount of lot coverage, look at that 33% and try to reduce that. That would be, because the allowable increase based on our code, where those numbers are coming from, with this particular change now of areas of driveway being eliminated, there won't be any gain from driveways and bump outs and those additional areas of substantial parking areas that would be credited to that allowable increase. So most of that has eliminated. So that was the reason why you see the reduction in the percentage there. But if the desire, from what I'm hearing,
if
is
you
to,
look at what Lee presented, 66 or whatever, roughly 65%.
that's coming from building footprint. So like I said, if you're trying to reduce building footprint does not come out of that right side of the column. It comes out of the left side of the column.
Understand.
So if you wanted to reduce total coverage.
We don't necessarily
Yeah.
want to reduce it, we just don't want to allow more.
Yeah,
So I mean, if 33% is, kind of what we're living with, then why would we allow it to go to 37%?
well, nothing.
When again,
there's
already
there's only a
65%.
there's only a certain, this threshold that you see here, certain criteria have to be met in order for that to occur. This isn't like a free-for-all that any property can go above the 33%. There's certain criteria that have to be met.
Right, and they're underneath.
They're right underneath. So pervious walks and patios, raised courtyards and planters, those can be allowed to that allowable increase.
Yeah, I think I read it as by incentivizing additional permeable surfaces, because giving you that the less water, you're offsetting it, I guess is what I thought, Ron.
Yeah,
I
but
thought-
like I said, if we just want to decrease the amount of impervious surfaces, we know that the houses right now, the
Right.
buildings represent 65%.
Yeah.
And obviously, even if, and the driveways only represent 3.5%.
Yeah.
So, and we're worried about driveways. Well, what we don't want is another
But I
4% of building size.
But I assumed that it would require pervious systems or driveways to be put in, which would allow more water. And so you give them a little more room, but they have to make sure that it's more efficient from.
I mean, if you look at what qualifies it varies, impervious walks and patios, and, I mean, I don't know why you'd want the house to be 4% larger.
Well, the house is not getting 4%
The house is
larger.
not getting, that's
It's
what I'm
not
saying.
getting-
That's
the
that's
house lot
point
coverage
here.
doesn't change.
The house itself is not getting larger by that right column.
Okay.
It's not the lot, the house, not the coverage, it's these parking places and driveways and things.
Walkways.
Well, because driveways are up, so it'll be walkways and stuff, so, if somebody would put in a 10 by 10 concrete feature patio, but now you say, okay, you can do it 10% more, but it's got to be impervious, not impervious concrete.
Okay.
That's what I thought it was going to be offset by the fact that you were going to improve the water drainage in that area.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess we were thinking, we just don't want an offset, we want a total reduction in
Well, yeah,
impervious.
But apparently an incentive is to try to get somebody to do something they don't want to do.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you pass an ordinance that requires driveways to be pervious, that is a total reduction.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and so I just wanted to clarify two things. One was I misspoke before. The current ARB lot coverage allowance for most single-family residential with a maximum lot coverage of 33 is 20%, which results in additional 6.67%. So a property could have 39.67% coverage. 6% of that, the allowance, has to be pervious.
Right. Got it. And that's why I'm saying,
So-
they can do it bigger if it's pervious.
That's right.
That's what
And-
I said.
Okay.
And one thing that I did actually have a note about that I am concerned about if you reduce these maximums is that it means that there is less room and flexibility for pervious paving and driveways. So could it result then in less functional driveways, more parking on the street? Yes, because that's how people are using it now. They are incentivized to put in entirely pervious driveways so that they can use some of that 6% for more paving area if they have that need. But it's also used for, at-grade decking, interior, low planters, anything that is also pervious.
Is it being used? I was just thinking of Michael's comment that driving around, you saw one driveway that was pervious. I'm wondering how much of this incentive is actually being used for that purpose.
It's used quite a bit.
Quite a bit,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, seeing especially for new homes.
Right, new homes.
Yeah, that are coming through the ARB. So, I don't see how decreasing that percentage actually supports your overall goals because all of that is already pervious. All it does is limit an owner's ability to meet, minimal program, like get a compacted gravel path from their garage out to their driveway so they can pull their trash cans, on something that's a little smoother than mulch, for example. That's how we see that allowable increase used, for example. Thank you.
Other questions? What I wanted to do at least is just kind of walk through the actual changes that were brought back from council so that there's a understanding of what is in the current draft of the ordinance. And then if there are questions or comments, then we can go them one by one based on those. So beginning in section 12-128, I'm reading or using my notes from the memorandum that was shared under section 12-128. What I'm identifying as a qualifier, this is to essentially connect the purpose of these particular changes to its original intent being birthed from a more resilient Kiowa and our comprehensive marsh management plan. This language that's being added now just states or adds to the intent of it's not just access, it's not just safety, but it's actually now promoting environmental stewardship. It's actually looking at best management practice from a stormwater management standpoint. And so,
I'm sorry, what are you reading from?
so
I'm on
if you're looking at the ordinance itself, it's page 3 of,
12.128, right?
yeah, 12-128, that first amendment there on that first paragraph.
Okay, so the red is what the town council has suggested?
Correct.
Okay, so this is not what we sent up, this is what they've asked to be
Yeah,
amended.
so one of the comments was raised that, well, with these particular changes, this does change the intent of the ordinance where it's not just focused on design and safety and proper access for driveways and parking facilities, but now we've moved into an era of ensuring that these parking facilities and driveways have a component built into environmental stewardship. So that's just connecting the intent of the ordinance.
Okay.
The second change there that you see is that previously the ordinance read that replacement driveways would be required to become pervious. This now removes that. So right now it reads all new driveways permitted after X date shall be constructed of a pervious material. So that was one of the what I would call discussion points is that council felt that replacement driveways, previously, whereas the planning commission recommended that replacement driveways should be pervious, that was a change.
Right, and with respect to that one, John, I thought one of the concerns raised in the town council meeting was that for replacement driveways, people didn't feel they had enough lead time if the ordinance went into effect immediately. So I question if we're now just applying this to new, do we need to have a deferred implementation date if we go that way?
Yeah, so that was one of the recommendations that was added, and a discussion point for you all today is suggest a time window for the implementation of this. So I didn't get to that comment, but that is one of the things that I was going to share with you guys for additional recommendation of a time window of implementation. What we've heard from staff, and Jen kind of alluded to it during her comments, is that design teams will typically prepare an engagement letter with a client or go through the architectural review board process and get to a stage where it's comfortable for them to submit for permits. And that ARB review might have one material, and if this ordinance passes, hypothetically, we could run into a situation where those who have gone through that process have already engaged a client with a certain material type, impervious, and now that we've required a pervious material, they would have to go back to that property owner and say, hey, a design change. So that lead time originally was suggested to be 90 days by one of the builders. Staff's 30-day recommendation just came on. We didn't want to set a precedent of passing the ordinance or not passing the ordinance in a window where we would see a significant influx in permit applications before that window came into effect, because essentially you would be saying, well, the ordinance is not in effect yet. Come one, come all to go and apply for your impervious driveway or for new construction. And then that way, we're not getting the effect of the ordinance, because so that window, like I said, we've had some discussions in our comprehensive marsh management workshop meeting last Friday. It was stated that 45 days seemed a little bit reasonable, but that's one of the things that you guys can discuss today as one of the recommendations.
Seems that discussion needs to follow some more information again about, specifically about costs and what types of surfaces are applicable to heavy loads and wear and tear and things like that. I think there's a gap in what our knowledge base is or the information we need. Before we worry about timing, I think we need to be able to answer those questions.
So I'll pause there and then ask this question regarding additional resources, data, metrics, or whatever. I hear a lot that regarding costs. Is that particular item a hurdle for accomplishing any recommendation? Because we can just say we'll table this and go provide directly that type of level of engagement with the private sector to be able to bring some of that comfortability to you. I mean,
No,
that wouldn't be the.
And John,
Sorry.
John, are you able to go back to the materials that you presented on our July 3rd Planning Commission meeting where it summarized some different costs involved, if different materials for pavers, pervious asphalt,
Yes.
pea gravel, et cetera? I found that, personally, I found it very helpful. And with the project that I'm working on with the Inlet Cove neighbors, a lot of the costs actually aligned with what we're experiencing based on actual application of some of these materials.
So just as a following up our Commissioner Babinet's comment regarding, staff did in an initial presentation include what I'm calling a soft quote from contractor, and this was provided by Three Oaks of, based on square footage, what that cost factor would be for different material types. And so this particular pervious concrete paver, you can see that it ranges between $14 to $28 a square foot. We also included pervious paving systems, pervious asphalt and concrete, where the conventional asphalt ranged from about $13 to $14 a square foot, where pervious asphalt ranged about $15 to $16 a square feet. And likewise, you see there with concrete, the conventional $7 to $11 a square foot with a $11.50 increase for pervious concrete. The additional ones that we looked at were, I guess, the more cost prudent, were softer materials, the pea gravel plantation mix that are also currently used on island, or a little less than cost. So these were numbers that we felt that we could at least give a ballpark figure to understand what the range of cost is, trying to provide exact details of what a homeowner may cost, because driveways vary in size, materiality, design, whatever that property owner may want to do on that property. It's hard for us to gauge directly of how that would impact every property owner across the island. So that's why I asked the question, if there's additional concern about specific cost, we can try to go and engage the private sector to provide a little bit more detail, but I think they'll be hesitant to kind of put their cost values out there, source value, without doing that at an individual level to the property owner. The one thing that I'll say here, as part of this process, when we did consider pervious elements, we did not think that cost, I'm not saying it's not a factor, but we're not putting a burden on for a property owner to choose a specific product type. And so that product type is a range of materials. There's still even more other elements that we're still learning a little bit more about, product types that we're learning more information about today, that would potentially still count as the permeable or pervious surface. Hopefully that follows up, Mr. Babinick, to what your comments were.
It exactly does, and as I said, it's very much in line with what we're experiencing for the actual products being installed in our neighborhood, so the numbers seem to be pretty accurate.
So, but why is there such a diversity of opinion about what the cost differential is?
I think it's apples to oranges, because people will be looking at a asphalt driveway or concrete driveway and want to upgrade to pavers.
So I think the cost factor as well, it's not necessarily the product type. There's a concern of the applicability, right? So when the ordinance was introduced, it was introduced that it would only be applicable to non-single family. And so I think there's also a cost factor when you think of how regimes and parking areas and how that work. You have to get buy-in from that entire unit in order to replace. And so now that creates an issue of assessments to that particular community or neighborhood or.
Well, one of the things that I thought about when I read Shannon's note is that coming from an engineering background, is that what's the duty cycle? I mean, what are the relative performance? What are the duty cycles, and what are the relative performance metrics for each of these materials in that duty cycle?
That's a good question. I don't know how often, if you have any insight to that, Lee, on maintenance or
Longevity, for sure.
I don't know if you do. Yeah.
I got some off the top of my head.
Okay.
No, I mean, I don't need that. We need to understand that right now. I think it needs to be compiled so that, first of all, we have an existential problem. We've got waters coming up, and, we need to deal. And I think everybody wants to do something about it. It's not that I think we want to move forward, but we don't understand what are the options and how can we deal with it.
And I guess the other question is, can we put these restraints on just certain properties and not everyone? I mean, that doesn't seem fair, that we're going to, make the windswept parking be of this, whereas a new driveway doesn't have to be, or a replacement driveway.
Yeah, I mean, they're all homeowners. They just happen to live in different types of homes.
Right. So can you put different requirements on one type of home and not all? I mean, it seems unfair.
Well, the amendment, John, was for new driveways, correct?
If we can address your first comment and then we come back to that one, I think that way we can kind of keep track. Because I think that your comment about difference in property owners takes us to another commentaries.
So I don't have the information off the top of my head, but if you go under the pervious pavement options in our nature-based solutions manual, it actually details all the maintenance requirements. and the different types of materials, how to design it, pretty much everything you would need to know about it. A lot of it comes from the Charleston County Stormwater Manual and the Low Impact Development Manual for coastal South Carolina.
No, I may be misled, but I thought there was an issue that at the town council, they were concerned about the cost that we were imposing.
Town council, members of town council did raise the comment that this particular ordinance would burden the cost of a property owner by forcing them to replace their driveways and make them,
Okay, you said replacement. Did you mean to say that? Because we're talking about new versus, we're not talking about replacement now.
Right, this
That's
is
one
new.
of the-
oh, new.
We were originally both.
Okay, so that's so that cost was under the context of trying to force somebody to replace, when somebody was
Yeah, and I
replaced.
think that's why you see the council's recommendation or the language that council shared, that is no longer included for a replacement driveway. I thought they had come to somewhat of a
Okay,
consensus.
okay, that's helpful, that's very helpful. Okay.
But do we, and that's something we have to figure out whether
That
we
goes
agree
to my
with.
second comment. I mean,
Yeah.
a new driveway has to be this, but a replacement
Right.
driveway's, do whatever you want.
So from staff's perspective, we support the original, both, we felt that that was the impact of quote-unquote bang for your buck. We know that we're in a redevelopment stage, so putting that, understanding that redevelopment is going to be more pressure than new construction, that's why the replacement driver was in there. So that's where staff's recommendation is coming from, of why driver replacements were a part of that, the ordinance in its
So we
an
can put
original
it back
form.
in.
Sure, if you. Okay.
My original comments all related to if you guys were considering making this applicable to replacement driveways, okay? There's some, these are some great pictures and information about really inexpensive alternatives for pervious. However, we can't do this on the island, at least not in my regime, I can't do this. So, because the regime has requirements.
But you
You
can
can't-
change your regime can change its rules if they so choose.
Right, but if I need to replace my driveway now, I have to go to the regime, I have to go to ARB, I have to go to so many different places to get that approved. And so these inexpensive alternatives aren't realistic, at least not in a short term. And the other issue is, the other concern is that in just a quick, this is not factual, absolute, but in a quick search, pervious concrete is twice as expensive as regular concrete. That's a quick search. That's the first headline that you see when you ask about the difference price, twice as much. So the pavers at 60% more is a cheaper alternative than if that's true about pervious concrete. Okay, so my $58 million number would skyrocket to 80 million?
Yeah.
And that's only replacement driveways is all I was talking about. I was not talking about new, that doesn't apply to this. I'm only talking about replacement driveways. If you replace all 112 acres of it, is $58 million under the least expensive pervious alternative that's applicable and acceptable on the island.
Well, the replacement will always be much more expensive because you have to pay for the demolition, to destroy what's there now, remove it, and then start over versus brand-new driveway. So
You're still doing excavation for the brand new
Absolutely.
driveway and whatever else, but yeah.
demolition costs, sure.
Yep.
Sure. Okay. Okay, John, let's move forward. Where we are with it? Where are we?
Okay, so I'll continue to work through the ordinance based on the changes that you see before you. So if you move on to page 6 of 10 in your materials, this is under parking design standards D, under Exhibit B. This is the same section. During town council's discussion, there was a concern regarding the parking facility. So there was in-depth discussion regarding how do we look at parking facilities and how do we look at replacement. What was voted on was that town town council director, our legal counsel, and planning staff to kind of look at what would be a suitable option for replacement driveways. That 50% that you see in the ordinance is built on the framework of what's already existing in the code. So if you look in this particular section, item D2, that just adds a little bit more clarity of what was drafted in red, but that section reads, parking facilities constructed or reconstructed greater than 50% of their original size, subsequent to the effective date of the ordinance from which the article is derived, shall conform to these design standards. So in theory, this particular application of the ordinance, if someone was reconstructing their parking facility greater than 50%, they would need to meet the new standard. So they would need, if this was required to be non-permeable, that would require them to make that parking facility permeable. So that's why the language in number 12 sort of mirrors that particular item of the 50%. Now, we've heard today that 50% may not be what is suitable for every design project based on if someone is doing a portion of the drive. So that is one thing that you guys can consider today in making a recommendation of how do you treat parking facilities. And through conversation of the last week, this is not intended, I think, to penalize the entire parking areas. We know that there would be areas of just small areas that need to be repaired over time. But what we did not want to happen is that someone is doing that intently just to not meet the letter of the law of making the parking facilities pervious. What Shannon White's comments were, I think it's feasible for the Planning Commission to look at just the parking spaces, making those permeable, and the drive aisles not necessarily meaning those to be pervious. Those can become impervious. But this is another, like I said, discussion point for you all to consider.
That would be in that section then?
Yes. There were no changes on the last page of this particular ordinance regarding the infiltration rate. That's still listed at 0.1 inch an hour. And then, of course, the definitions there were still modified. There were no changes to that particular section. The other thing that I kind of mentioned earlier, briefly, I'll mention just the implementation or effective date. Like I said, that's another point, is a discussion for you all. So unless we can, Mr. Chair, go by just having a few more discussion points on some of those items, or if you guys need more time, more information, just want to kind of gauge where you all are.
Well, can we answer the question, so if we're gonna make the parking spaces pervious, and then we want the main routes to be more allowable.
Load-bearing.
Is these pervious asphalt or concrete, are they able to handle the heavier load trucks?
Yeah, I'm not the engineer to give that response to can it handle the load. We know that during our initial discussions in the marsh management workshop, extremely used areas of actual like roadways, it's not encouraged for that to be the asphalt, but those are different design standards. Each material product is a little bit different. It can be probably engineered to meet those metrics.
Didn't Shannon in her note imply the fact that she's got pervious in the parking places, but impervious so she assumes there are designs that can handle that.
Yeah.
Right.
No, but you were referencing like the actual drive aisles, like making that, what material can actually handle.
What material is that required?
Yeah, I just knew that there was concern of, hypothetically, when we initially started this conversation of, well, let's just make everything now impervious on the island. Those heavily used pathways and roadways, right-of-ways, we didn't think that would be feasible because of the traffic, because of the continued use and wear and tear.
No, when you said drive outs, so we're not talking driveways anymore, we're talking about roads?
So not a road, not a,
Shannon's email.
From the parking lots, yeah. And that's what she said, they've designed it so that they can handle the higher loads and the drive outs, but then they have pervious parking places.
Right.
yeah, was gonna try to find, I thought I had maybe an example here. Yeah, so this might be the closest that you see, sorry. And this is, so where this Mustang is parked here in the image in the center, the area where he's parked, in context, what I think, in application of what I think I'm hearing is that that area would be required to be pervious. The darker area where it's the drive aisle of that, so the center lane where the cars enter and exit, that would not be required to be pervious. Is that kind of what I'm kind of hearing? And so what I want to do is gain the understanding of what direction you want to go, and then we can find the language that marries to what you guys think would be.
Is it important that we treat all homeowners equally? So I'm not convinced that we should eliminate replacement driveways. You know, single-family, multifamily, new or replacement, if we want pervious driveways, we should want pervious driveways. I don't understand the logic to not including replacement.
Well, I think it goes back to the fact that the existing driveways are going to cost so much more to replace because of the demolition cost, the removal of the concrete and whatever.
They're gonna have that
As are the existing
anyway.
parking lots.
Pardon me?
As the same as the, so again, for the multifamily parking facilities, their replacement costs are gonna be much more as well. But yet we're talking that they're gonna be required.
The other thing that I didn't mention is that we're not asking anyone to go and tear up their driveways today and do any of that today, but this would be essentially upon time warranted that they are, where it's no longer feasible, that now that would be required. We aren't seeing, we aren't asking anyone to has a impervious driveway that's in standard good condition to now, and if this ordinance is passed, that you're required to rip that up and replace it. However, if there was one in bad condition and it was time for that to be replaced, now that they're going into that process, it would be required to be pervious.
Right.
So I agree with Joanne. I think that, you know, favor that we bring the replacement driveways back into the ordinance.
So process-wise, if before we go, because that's what I want to do is work through the text and make these amendments accordingly so that we can record them and document them. If there aren't any like general big picture kind of things before we get into the weeds of that like specific thing, then we can move that way.
Bill, we're ready to move ahead. Do we have enough
Yes.
data? Are there things that people are not comfortable with knowing before we impose this? Michael has some.
I'm hearing there's some discomfort in nailing down the exact costs and not just variances. It'd be great to see a chart that says per 1,000 square foot, here is the options as identified by these three outside companies. I just, you know, I would feel bad about someone that has to, that's been here, living here for a long, long time, they're on a fixed income, they've got to pull up their driveway because the tree roots have buckled it and made it unsafe. And they're thinking in their mind, wow, this is going to cost $20,000. And guess what? It's $50,000. I just don't feel good with that.
But, I mean, again, the state that we're in is that we're at 18%. And if we don't do things, we're gonna be at 20% or maybe more, you know? So I think while you feel bad about that, and certainly no one wants to see that excess cost, I think, again, we still have to confront this and move forward. So,
Yeah,
I mean, I think that looking at costs is very important and seeing what the specific costs are gonna be. But yet again, even though that cost is gonna be more, I think unfortunately, we still have to move forward.
I think what we can also do, Jean, you're our liaison to the regimes, that, you know, the regimes do have rules that were written probably, they could have been 10, 20, 40, 50 years ago that these rules were written. And I don't see a problem. This is something we're working on in the comprehensive plan with the Kiowa Alliance, trying to get people to talk to each other. Let's talk to the leaders of these regimes and say, maybe you need to broaden the allowable things that people can do with their driveways. And I think, you know, given we all care about this island, we're all aware of sea level rise, we're all aware that flooding is a major issue, I would think regime people, the leaders of the regimes would be on board with this. Maybe I don't know.
I think so. And I mean, right now, I'm pretty certain most regimes allow asphalt and concrete. I would argue that permeable asphalt and permeable concrete is just a form of an allowed product. So I'm happy to take that to the council.
Gene, when you talk about the regimes and these requirements, are these requirements in your covenants, or these are just things that the board elected to decide?
These are things that the board elected to decide and approve as permissible driveways. In some cases, in my community, I've been told that we've been limited to a certain number by KICA or ARB or whatever. So I think it's making more choices available and making sure that the choice we have include these permeable alternatives, permeable asphalt, permeable concrete.
The reason I ask that is if you're talking about changing covenants, that can
Oh
be
my gosh, yeah.
a terrible process.
Yeah, that would take a long time.
And we did get from the Architecture Review Board, and a lot of the communication that we've been trying to push out, they've set out on some agreeable product types that are amenable. So that can be something that's utilized in your discussions with the regime leaders of, hey, the ARB has already pre-approved these types of products as well.
We do limit the variety of materials for driveways that can be used within regimes.
Oh, okay.
Because driveways are located in such proximity to each other.
Yeah.
In, you know, Inlet Cove, Sparrow. Sorry, would you mind sharing that with Gene?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, I couldn't hear. And
No,
I'm not that old, so.
Jen was commenting that they do limit the product types for regimes because of the design, and since some of the driveways are located really close to each other, so they do limit the product types for certain regimes.
Okay, that makes sense. Again, though, I feel that, you know, if asphalt is allowed, if permeable asphalt is type of asphalt, that should also be allowed. I could take that up with the regime council.
So, members, are we then boiling this down to the crux of this discussion now is whether we include replacements?
What I think you could do just before you answer that is there's
They were
two
gonna answer.
things. I think give me what you think about driveways, give me what you think about parking facilities, and I think from there you could decide what are the next steps.
Okay, so you're saying we need to make a decision independent from parking spaces and independent for driveways?
I think that helps you
Okay.
from my perspective of the discussion. Yeah.
Dr. Uchenna.
Michael, you have a question?
Well, not so much a question, but maybe an observation, you know, of what I've heard, okay?
Sure.
So I think we all understand that living on this island is not inexpensive, right? But we have to, you know, reflect on the fact that we have a lot of citizens that cannot, you know, afford a lot, right? I mean, that's the thing. But still, I think what I've heard is, first of all, the predominant factor should be we should treat everybody the same way, right? We should not make exclusions, etc. But I think you can also start thinking about alternatives. And when you guys talked about parking spaces and what Shannon wrote you, I mean, you can, for example, say that, you know, even a replacement driveway can be allowed to have a certain percentage of impermeable or impervious surface and a certain percentage of permeable surface. And that's basically the Shannon example, right? You take the whole Sandcastle parking lot, some of it is impervious because that's where all the cars are driving and the trucks that deliver, etc. And the sites where you park is permeable. That can also apply to, you know, a private driveway, right? That you have in the middle for the two tire tracks, basically an impervious surface, 30% maybe, and 70% is 30% for the tire tracks is impermeable or impervious, and the rest is impervious. That might also work and be a good compromise, might even help with the cost. I would also be careful in throwing out numbers of what, is it 100% more, 50% more? I would question that, right? I think the key purpose is how can we help this island to survive? And I think that should be the driving factor for all. So I would urge you to put, renovations or replacement driveways back into the ordinance, because I think that is the only way to really make a substantial impact. If we are only doing this for those few more lots that we have to be built out, I think that's, to me, honestly, that's window dressing. We should address the topic head on, make it fair for everybody, but maybe do a little bit of compromises left and right, how these permeable surfaces can be built so that we can manage the cost and the usability and the maintenance of these driveways.
Ron, go ahead.
Again, the part of this talks about perimeter landscaping for around parking, and also even water management along the driveways. So besides making a compromise of 50% pervious and 50% impervious, you could also consider some water
runoff management strategy.
Absorption, yeah.
along the perimeter of the driveway is, again, to help lower the cost, but still accomplish what you want to accomplish.
I was just going to add that I lost it. Dang. It's okay. It'll come back.
Sometimes.
So I can then, if what I'm hearing, I'm just trying to still gather, but seems like a good discussion. I don't want to step on the discussion and engagement. But what I'm hearing is that, number one, there's a consideration to bring back replacements into the ordinance.
I guess, is there a chance that we could have a information session with somebody who actually puts these pervious driveways in or parking lots in, that can give us some more information about costs and what they can handle and how much maintenance they require and things like that?
Okay.
I just think that, again, if we could get a little bit more information with somebody who actually is putting these pervious systems in, that maybe we'd be able to move forward a little bit more quickly.
And the only problem I
to
have with
that
that is that what would be your metric? Is 25% okay, 50% okay,
Right.
75? We'd have to have some sort of metric that we would.
Well, like I said, and we don't have whether that's an engineer or a combination of people, but I think that, yeah, those are the questions. We want to put some standards in that accomplish the water management, but yet again, we don't want to necessarily do so without all the knowledge we need, all the knowledge we should, where we put something together that's exorbitantly priced when we could offer something that still accomplishes the goal with less.
That's kind of where I'm at on this too.
So we could hit, what I'm hearing is a pause button on it, and
Yep.
we will try to engage with the private sector to get someone in here that would be able to answer some of the questions regarding cost, maintenance, or that type of, I see head nodding. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think that would close that comfort gap that exists. There's definitely some of that, I think. I think we're all agreeing that we can go back to the existing driveways as well as the new ones. There needs to be some language changes to the text amendment, but Ron's point of having one of the installers come in and give us maybe a presentation before we vote the next time may be very, very helpful. John, what do you think?
Yeah, we will reach out to a few of the installers on island and engage with them if we can do that. I mean, this is a holiday, so probably won't be able to get that until first of the year or so.
Sure.
But I think that that would be a reasonable ask based on what I'm hearing about your unreadiness, if you will, to move forward.
And, again, we could just have a small group meet with those people and disseminate the information to the whole committee.
Okay. Could I have
And can I request for that too, that if we have an outside contractor come in from commercial side, if we have somebody like Lee or somebody with a similar level of expertise to keep us engaged in it and translate it into something that we could all understand?
Fair
Yeah.
enough.
So can I have then a formal motion to that effect of unless there's any other things that you guys?
One more.
One more. I think in addition to having a contractor, to come in and talk to us about what does this mean in terms of cost and to install and to maintain, one other thing that perplexes me is runoff from driveways on this island runs off into sand.
Or marsh.
Or marsh. But most driveways aren't right up against the marsh. So it runs off into sand. Are we really accomplishing anything by letting the water go down, straight down, or go off to the side and go straight down? I just don't know.
We had an excellent presentation several months ago on
That young man.
the two factors, and that was the quality of the water being run off and the volume of the water being run off. It was a very good presentation. It opened my eyes, and I think other members
Yeah.
of the commission.
I think we can have the thumbnail of that next time too, so you,
Yeah.
not to delay or to make this run longer than it.
Sure.
Yeah, it was just, I thought a little more
I know, it's-
information
No, we-
about what does it really mean.
It's consistent,
would be helpful.
with having, Lee here to kind of give a balance to it as Gene suggested.
So John, I think we're at a stage where we
Who's gonna make a motion?
seek a motion to table this until some further data is presented before the planning commission.
Yeah, and I would-
Correct?
And with the intent that we want to bring, and let council know that we want to bring back
Well, that'd be a part of the additional data.
Yeah.
existing.
Yeah, so I would just say frame it in a way that there's expectation that you would engage with said persons or group entities and then have another opportunity to review it before it goes to council. So just in that framework.
Okay, that said it.
Okay.
I second your motion. Can you make a motion?
Okay, do I have a motion?
I move what John just said.
That we table
We'll
the,
craft it in a way that,
How about a motion to table this until such time as we have outside experts and commercial installers provide further education to the commission to make an informed decision on this?
Very good, Gene. Do I have a second? Okay, all those.
I'll second that.
Thank you, John. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Good. And I think we've gone through public comments, am I correct? So let's go to commissioner comments. Start with our Zoom people. John, you got any comments?
I guess the only question I have is, if we decide we want to put driveway replacements back in, what kind of reaction do you think we will get from the council?
Well, we'll have to put it in and find out.
Find out.
Because I personally think that driveway replacements have to be there, but
as
Okay.
my opinion.
Okay. Gene, any comments?
Same school of thought as John. It makes little sense that house on one side of the street could be required and the other side not required. So I'm all in favor of putting replacements back in. In addition to that, I just want to wish all my other members up there, Merry Christmas holiday, Happy New Year.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to a happy 25.
Enjoy Colorado.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Curran?
I think the only thing I would say is we gained a lot with when we were going through the tree preservation by involving the experts, the professionals. They really helped us reach a better product, and I think that's where we're at again.
I agree.
I think that, again, if you can get a few different people that would want to participate in that meeting, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Joanne?
I completely agree with John, Jean, and Ron. I think we want to treat everyone on the island equally, and I think we're making a step in the right direction.
Thank you. And Larry?
The only thing I'll say is that I am convinced in talking with my colleagues that we understand we've got an existential issue with rising water, and we have to address it. And this is one step we can address it, but we want to do it in the right way.
Okay. Do I have a motion for adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
A second?
Second.
Second.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was